Last year, Business Insider reported on the biggest media firms in the world. At number 22, yielding over $3 billion in revenue each year, was the famous German media group Axel Springer. And it is expanding. As the Insider reported, it owns newspapers, magazines, TV channels, radio stations and websites in 35 countries. In September last year, Axel Springer acquired 88% of Business Insider for $343 million in cash, bringing its total stake up to 97%. Hackers ranks it among the top 10 in Europe, noting that although it is historically a newspaper publisher, it is now very focused on digital with a corporate mission to be the leading digital publisher. Beyond the boosterism, though, the digital shift is a response to a deep, lasting decline. To understand how the Springer Group is evolving, it is necessary to see where it has come from. The newspaper group was founded in 1946 in West Berlin by the journalist Axel Springer during the Allied occupation. Springer had been trained as an apprentice in his father's publishing firm, which was shut down in the Nazi period. Springer was a conservative nationalist, but not a Nazi. In the post-war period, he aligned with the right wing of the Christian Democratic Party. His first evening newspaper was the Hamburger Abendblatt. He added the mass tabloid Bild, literally picture, to his roster in 1952. The latter was to become hugely popular and a major influence on public opinion. Springer's approach was formulaic, a combination of entertainment, gossip, and reactionary politics. And it worked. At its height, the group controlled 40% of the national newspaper market. His purpose was not just profit, however, but victory in the Cold War and the reunification of Germany. The group's corporate mission, as its website explains, was to promote Germany as a member of the Western family of nations, to support the vital rights of the State of Israel, reject political totalitarianism, and support a free social market economy. Springer became to West German politics what Rupert Murdoch would become to British politics, an immensely powerful and monetary presence. A bête noire of the literati as well as the left, a status confirmed in novelist Heinrich Böll's attack on Bild in his novel The Lost Honour of Katharina Blum. But because of his ideological support for Israel, some are inclined to view him through rose-tinted glasses. The good Murdoch, as James Kirchick dubs him in Tablet, remarking, Springer fought an uphill battle to orient German public opinion in favour of Israel. The Times of Israel likewise celebrates that when Israel launched its Six-Day War, leading to the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, Bild was a constant ally, its front page declaring, in Springer's own words, "The Israelis have the right to live in peace without permanent new Arab blackmails." Bild was also a ferocious opponent of the left, particularly the emerging student left in the 60s. Its articles, as Spiegel reports, exhorted readers to stop the terror of the young Reds now and eliminate the troublemakers. In 1968, the student activist Rudi Dutschke was shot by a Hitler-worshipping youth and would eventually die of his wounds. The student movement pointed the finger at Springer. Thousands of students marched on the Springer Group's headquarters in protest, chanting, "Dispossess Springer." But the group also attracted journalistic criticism. In 1968, a famous study of the press baron was written by Hans-Dieter Müller. It argued that the Springer Group represented a political threat to West German democracy because of the concentration of power in the hands of a hardline anti-communist nationalist. Like Rupert Murdoch, having built his newspaper empire, Springer spotted the potential of satellite television. In 1984, the year before his death, the company acquired a 15% holding in the satellite television company Sat1, which would later increase to a fifth. He also entered into a partnership with the Bertelsmann Media Group in a pay TV company called Teleclub. However, the advances made by Springer in this field were always limited. The Springer empire therefore focused on print. But with Springer himself out of the way, managers felt able to diversify and expand into international markets, acquiring special interest magazines in France, Spain, Italy, and the United Kingdom. With the end of the Cold War, it opened subsidiaries in Eastern Europe. By the 1990s, Springer's dominance was eroded, but it still occupied 28% of the daily German newspaper market. And in some regional markets, it had a virtual monopoly, 86.4% in Hamburg and 71.4% in West Berlin. Bild had a circulation of 5 million. At its height, Springer employed over 12,000 people. It had been possible to build a newspaper empire around a grand political project because industrial print economies favoured monopolies and one-way ideological traffic. This enabled Springer to help create the audience for political reaction. Even after Springer's death and the rise of a less politicised management, the reactionary tenor of Springer publications softened only by degree. However, the internet was to change all that, signalling the end of over half a millennium of stable print culture and the beginning of a period of decline. Springer had based his brand on support for free markets, but his business thrived on the monopolistic tendencies of industrial print media, where the costs of entry were prohibitively high. The new attention economies would give rise to different kinds of monopoly, favouring platforms like Google and Facebook. But overall, they were far more competitive than traditional print media. The German press was more resilient than elsewhere in Europe in the years after 2000. As late as 2011, only a fifth of Germans used the internet to check the news, while half read a newspaper. Trust in the press was higher than elsewhere in Europe, with more people willing to pay subscriptions. But by 2009, Deutsche Welle reported that the rot was setting in fast, as only 4% of Germans under the age of 20 still read a daily newspaper. Leading newspaper editors predicted that the industry would be killed by the iPhone within 5 or 10 years. By 2014, the Financial Times reported that the prestigious Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, one of Germany's leading titles, became the latest to add to the gloom, announcing 200 job cuts. The following year, however, Reuters reported a new trend. The crisis was stabilising because of the growth of online revenues. And it was in this context that Axel Springer began selling off its print publications. Spiegel noted that the group was selling off a clutch of newspapers, including the Hamburger Abendblatt. Germany had seen the demise of a number of its traditional print newspapers. The transition to digital proved to be very successful. The FT reported a 17% climb in the company's share value after it sold off the newspapers. The Economist reports in 2000 it had almost no digital revenue. By the end of last year, over 72% of its operating profit came from digital activities. Profits have increased by 37% over the past decade, from 434 million euros, or $473 million, in 2006 to 596 million euros last year. The crisis for press empires is not just economic, but political. This is partly why Springer's evolution is taking place along far less politicised lines than in the past. The economic crisis in print media is global. Global advertising revenues, the World Press Trends report says, have fallen from nearly $90 billion to $68 billion. But trust in all media is falling, especially in the traditional media, as the mass population rejects established authority. So if the future is digital, this doesn't just mean moving existing products online, it means adapting for new online subscribers. The number one thing audiences will pay for is focused coverage of a single issue or interest. And this explains the acquisition of Business Insider, but also the fact that, as Digiday reports, it has now acquired shares in Now This, Mike, Ozy, and the virtual reality business Jaunt. Now This, Mike and Ozy all have a broadly progressive political stance at odds with the traditional Springer politics. And this doesn't mean that the Springer Group is giving up its reactionary hobby horses. The flagship tabloid Bild continues to promote its virulent version of populist nationalism. During the Eurozone crisis, it ran a ferocious racist campaign against the Greeks. It opposed one of the EU's bailouts, demanding no to more billions for greedy Greeks. It blamed Greeks for the German pensions crisis, claiming that Germany propped up Greek living standards. During the refugee crisis, it ran scaremongering articles until it was forced to issue an emphatic apology to its readers for falsely claiming that there had been a mass sexual assault on Frankfurt women by Arab-looking men. It remains belligerently pro-Israel. It made headlines when it decided to publish a documentary film supposedly about anti-Semitism in Europe, but was dropped by the public French-German broadcaster Arte because it focused on demonizing Arabs and Palestinians. But even Bild is losing momentum. Its circulation is high relative to the rest of Europe, but selling around 1.79 million copies a day as of the first quarter of 2017, it is about a third of what it used to be at its height. It is also losing authority, becoming a niche within a much more diversified portfolio. Springer, a product of Cold War hierarchies, was unable to adapt to cable and satellite television and build its own version of Fox News. Now, losing ground in its print empire, its pragmatic managerial caste is looking for digital acquisition to save it. And that is the German version of a story that is taking place everywhere.